Long before European settlers set foot in North America, Native American tribes had mastered the art of guerrilla warfare, employing tactics that were both practical and deeply connected to their cultural practices. These tribes had long understood the significance of their environment, and their military strategies were not based on rigid formations or open battles, but on speed, agility, and unpredictability. Native American tribes viewed warfare as an extension of their spiritual beliefs. For many tribes, combat was not just about defeating an enemy. It was also about restoring balance, seeking revenge for slain relatives, and fulfilling spiritual obligations. This concept of warfare was evident in practices like mourning war, where warriors went to battle not necessarily to conquer territory, but to avenge deaths within the tribe, restore honor, and complete a spiritual duty. The warrior's role was central to these conflicts, and much of their training was designed around movement, stealth, and the ability to strike without warning. Rather than relying on formal military units like the European armies, Native American tribes operated in smaller, highly mobile groups that excelled in ambushes and surprise attacks. These tactics made use of their intimate knowledge of the land, which allowed them to disappear into forests, caves, or even the wide-open plains before their enemies could mount any significant resistance. The various tribes, each with their own distinct environmental landscapes, such as the forests of the Northeast, the Rocky Mountains, and the plains of the Midwest, further adapted these tactics to suit the terrain. For example, in the forests, warriors could use the dense undergrowth to move stealthily, often making use of the terrain's cover to strike at an unsuspecting enemy. This knowledge of the environment gave Native American warriors a strategic advantage over the more rigid European forces who were unaccustomed to the terrain and fighting in smaller, irregular groups. When European settlers began to establish colonies in North America, Native American tribes quickly realized they had to adapt their tactics to contend with new threats. The introduction of firearms and steel weaponry by Europeans initially placed the native tribes at a disadvantage. However, Native Americans adapted quickly, learning to use the technology in ways that maximized their strategic advantage. In the early stages of contact, such as during the Pequot War, 1636 to 1638, or King Philip's War, 1675 to 1678, native warriors fought using their traditional guerrilla strategies, despite the superior firepower of the European settler. For instance, the Wampanoag tribe, led by King Philip, Metacom, engaged in swift raids, ambushing English settlements and forcing the settlers to stay on the defensive. They relied on their knowledge of the land, using the forests for cover and attacking villages at night or during vulnerable times. By the time the French and Indian War, 1754 to 1763, came around, native tribes, such as the Iroquois, Shawnee, and Algonquin, had perfected their ambush techniques, especially in forested areas where traditional European battle formations were ill-suited. These tribes worked alongside French forces, utilizing guerrilla tactics to harass British troops. The British, accustomed to fighting in straight lines and open fields, were unprepared for the unpredictable, lightning-fast attacks from the Native American warriors. The real effectiveness of Native American guerrilla tactics, however, lay in their adaptability. Unlike the European military, which favored large-scale, organized battles, native tribes employed a more fluid and decentralized approach. This allowed warriors to make independent decisions on the battlefield, strike where they could do the most damage, and withdraw before the enemy could retaliate. The idea of direct confrontation was often avoided in favor of harassing attacks, hit-and-run tactics, and the use of surprise to break enemy morale. Native American warfare was built on the idea of individual autonomy. Unlike the European military system, which was heavily structured and organized, Native American warriors were expected to think for themselves, adapt to changing conditions, and rely on their own skills to achieve victory. This level of independence fostered a sense of personal responsibility and pride in one's abilities. In many Native American cultures, the warrior was seen as a symbol of personal honor. To be a warrior was to be an individual capable of executing swift, decisive actions. While European armies were based on strict hierarchies and obedience to commanders, Native American warriors operated with a far greater degree of autonomy. They were often leaders in their own right, making decisions on the battlefield based on what they perceived to be the most advantageous course of action. One of the clearest examples of this independent warrior spirit was seen in the Apache and Comanche tribes. The Apache, under leaders like Geronimo, operated in small, highly mobile bands that would frequently strike at American and Mexican forces. Geronimo was famous for his ability to command warriors without a rigid chain of command. His warriors followed him because they believed in his abilities, not because they were ordered to do so. The result was an incredibly dynamic and adaptable fighting force that could outmaneuver larger and better-equipped enemy armies. Similarly, the Comanche were renowned for their horse riding skills, which enabled them to move with remarkable speed. Their tactics involved sudden strikes, followed by immediate retreats, a method designed to keep their enemies off balance and to inflict damage without risking unnecessary confrontation. The Comanche warriors fought not by obeying orders, but by relying on their intuition, their superior knowledge of the land, and their individual prowess as horsemen. In many ways, this independent warfare system allowed Native American tribes to fight on their own terms. While European forces were trained to fight in large units, Native American warriors were highly skilled in operating in small, mobile groups, constantly shifting positions and using the terrain to their advantage. Their success was not based on sheer numbers, but on the ability to strike when the enemy was least expecting it, and then retreating before the enemy could regroup. The Battle of the Little Bighorn, also known as Custer's Last Stand, serves as a prime example of the effectiveness of independent Native American warfare. In 1876, General George Armstrong Custer led a detachment of U.S. cavalry against a combined force of Lakota Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors. What Custer did not anticipate was the highly decentralized nature of the native forces. Rather than fighting in a cohesive, coordinated unit, the native warriors fought in smaller bands, each one led by a warrior who made decisions based on his knowledge of the battlefield. Warriors like Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull led their forces using hit-and-run tactics, surrounding Custer's forces on all sides. The flexibility of the native warriors, combined with their familiarity with the terrain, allowed them to outmaneuver Custer's forces at every turn. Custer's mistake was to underestimate the warriors' independence and tactical abilities. While his forces were highly organized, they were also highly vulnerable. The Native American warriors, by contrast, used their ability to operate independently to outflank the cavalry, cutting off escape routes and surrounding them on all sides. In the end, the battle resulted in a decisive defeat for Custer and a resounding victory for the Native American forces, demonstrating the power of decentralized, independent combat. Beyond the physical elements of warfare, Native American tribes also employed psychological tactics to demoralize their enemies. This form of warfare relied on fear, intimidation, and the use of cultural symbols to unnerve opposing forces. The psychological impact of a Native American warrior could often be as devastating as the physical strike. One of the key tools in psychological warfare was the war cry. The war cry served multiple purposes. It rallied native warriors, intimidated the enemy, and marked the start of an attack. The sound of a war cry echoed across the battlefield, striking fear into the hearts of their enemies. Native American warriors also used symbols such as war paint to convey their strength and connection to spiritual forces. Warriors would paint their faces and bodies with intricate designs that often represented their accomplishments or spiritual connection. The symbols were intended to strike fear into their enemies, as they were designed to make the warriors appear larger, fiercer, and invincible. These visual cues were deeply connected to the warriors' identities and were meant to show that they were in tune with the natural world and their ancestors. The psychological warfare employed by Native Americans was further enhanced by practices like scalping. The act of scalping a fallen enemy was both a symbolic and a practical method of demoralization. To scalping victims, it represented a loss of dignity. To European settlers, it was a gruesome reminder of the ruthlessness of their enemies. Scalps were displayed as trophies, further intensifying the psychological pressure on opposing forces. The psychological effects of these tactics were profound. As European settlers faced relentless raids, their morale would often break down, and many would abandon their settlements. The combination of psychological warfare and guerrilla tactics created an environment in which Native American warriors had an advantage despite being outnumbered and often outgunned. The psychological impact of native warfare also contributed to the breakdown of European military strategy in North America. The inability of European forces to adapt to these unconventional methods led to confusion, frustration, and fear. The psychological toll of battling enemies who would strike and vanish without a trace left many European soldiers on edge, further compounding the difficulties of the conflict. One of the most significant advantages that Native American tribes had in battle was their intimate knowledge of the land. Native warriors were masters of their environment, using it not just for sustenance, but also as a tactical asset in warfare. Whether in the dense forests, mountainous terrain, or open plains, Native Americans had an unparalleled ability to move through and use the terrain to their advantage. The ability to blend into the environment was a key factor in the success of Native American guerrilla tactics. For example, in the forests of the Northeast, tribes like the Algonquin and Mohawk used dense underbrush to conceal their movements. They would often wait in ambush, silently observing their enemies until the perfect moment to strike. This ability to disappear into the environment made it incredibly difficult for European forces to track or predict native movements. Similarly, in the deserts and rocky terrains of the Southwest, the Apache used caves and natural formations to their advantage. They could easily retreat into the terrain when pursued, using it as cover until the enemy grew tired of searching. The Apache were experts in using the land to outmaneuver larger enemy forces, creating traps and surprise attacks that caught their enemies off guard. On the Great Plains, the Comanche excelled at using wide-open spaces to their advantage. Known for their exceptional horsemanship, Comanche warriors would use the vast open fields to circle and encircle their enemies, striking swiftly and retreating before the enemy could retaliate. The Red River War, 1874 to 1875, between the U.S. Army and the Southern Plains tribes, including the Kiowa, Comanche, and Cheyenne, provides a striking example of Native American mastery of terrain. The tribes used their knowledge of the Texas Panhandle to launch raids on U.S. Army supply lines, causing significant disruptions. The U.S. Army, unfamiliar with the terrain, struggled to track and capture the native forces, who had mastered the art of using the land to remain elusive. The warriors would strike from behind hills and ravines, retreating before the army could mount an effective response. This mastery of terrain made the Native American tribes formidable adversaries, even against a much larger and better-equipped military force. The guerrilla tactics developed by Native American tribes continue to influence modern military strategies. Asymmetrical warfare, in which a smaller, less equipped force takes on a larger and more powerful enemy, draws heavily from Native American tactics. Today's insurgent groups and special forces often use similar strategies, drawing on the lessons learned from centuries of Native resistance against colonial powers. The methods used by Native American warriors in the 18th and 19th centuries have been studied by military strategists for their effectiveness in asymmetrical warfare. Insurgent groups across the globe have employed similar strategies. Small mobile units engaging in hit-and-run tactics, ambushes, and surprise raids. The ability to blend into the environment, the use of psychological warfare, and the decentralization of command all mirror the tactics that Native American warriors used to great effect. In addition, modern counterinsurgency tactics also echo the struggles faced by European powers in North America. Just as the British, Spanish, and U.S. Army struggled to adapt to guerrilla warfare in the 18th and 19th centuries, modern militaries face similar difficulties when dealing with irregular forces. The guerrilla warfare tactics developed by Native American tribes were far more than just military strategies. They were deeply rooted in the culture, history, and environment of the native peoples. These tactics allowed smaller, seemingly less powerful tribes to resist larger, more technologically advanced forces for centuries. The lessons learned from Native American warriors continue to resonate in modern warfare, offering valuable insights into the nature of asymmetrical conflict and the importance of adaptability, mobility, and psychological resilience. Native American guerrilla warfare, born out of necessity and honed by generations of warriors, remains an enduring legacy in the history of warfare.